Welcome to part 3 in our tutorial series on how to develop a Contras-like game with free visual engine Gdevelop. This video took us longer to prepare and release, because we had to implement many new graphics. The game art downloaded in the past episodes, although having most of the animations needed, was still missing a couple of important ones, and needed to be made in some cases as to split the character from gun, for reasons we will see in this video. The original game art, that we downloaded from the internet, included the source files created with Adobe Animate. We never used the tool before, but as good game developers, we were able to learn it and make the needed modifications with a smile on our lips, plus a lot of hard work, tears and sweat. But thankfully no blood was required. We will upload all the new graphics to the itch.io repository that we have created. Let's check what we have done in the previous video. If you remember, in the last tutorial, we were able to move the player through the mini-level created, plus jumping on and off the platforms in the level, with the corresponding animations. We created all the events needed to control the different behaviors associated with each game element. But, although it is a good start for a basic platformer, it isn't actually what happens in the Contra game. Let's check how is the character controller in Contra. We can move right and left, and we can shoot in both directions. If, while not moving, we press the up key, then the player's character points the gun, and if we hit the fire button, the character shoots upward. If we start moving right or left while pressing the up key, then the character moves while shooting at 45 degrees in the direction of the movement. In the same way, if we press the down key while moving, then the character shoots at 45° down. We can change our weapon, which will modify the type of bullets and fire being shot. And, if we press the key down with moving, then the character lays down in the ground in the direction of the movement and will shot in that direction if starting to shoot. Let's summarize everything in a figure to make sure that we don't forget anything while modifying the events from the previous tutorial. The first thing that we have to refine is the way we have implemented the character player. In the current solution, the character and the gun are in the same sprite, so if you would have to change the gun, you would have a new set of animations with the same character and different guns. This would cause for different characters with the same guns, then everything would have to be remade. That is not very effective. The best way is to split the character from the gun and then join them in the final game view. But in order to do that, then we need to change the way we control the character, which up to now was attached to the character sprite. Let's create a game object and call it PhysicPlayer. Add a new animation by clicking on the Add Animation button, and then, instead of searching for one in the disk, let's create a sprite using Piskel by clicking on the Edit with Piskel button. Of course, for this to work, you must have the Pixelart editor Piskel installed on your system. The editor will load and then select the Paint Bucket tool and then choose a color in the color palette in the left pane. In our case we have chosen a nice green. And then click in the drawing area to paint the entire canvas with the selected color. Once finished, on the top bar, click on the name of the sprite to modify it, and then click on the Save button to save the new sprite. Piskel will close, and you are sent back to Gdevelop. Since we are in the game object properties, let's add right away the behavior. Click on the Behavior tab and then on Platform Character to add it to our new PhysicPlayer. Deselect the checkbox on Default Controls, as we want full control on our character. If you want, you can modify any of the properties, but for now, in our case we will go with the defaults ones. Click Apply to finish, and we are back to our scene view. We are going now to modify the events that we have configured in the previous video, and create a new set of events that will allow us to better control our character player. Go to the Events tab, and now, in all the events that we added in the last video referencing to our player platformer controller, we need to modify them to point to the newly created PhysicPlayer. Basically, you will need to modify it in 3 places: the movement to the left and right, and in the jump section. Press the play button to preview the changes. The new player, represented by the green cube, is moving perfectly across the platform, while the old character player is hanging in the air in a state of permanent fall, while playing its animations. We can see also that it is still reacting to some inputs as it changes some of the animations. Let's modify it too. We are going to amputate the weapon for the player character and have them as two different objects in the game. Each of them will have the same number of animations that will overlap, as we have created them from the same art but stripping the gun from the correspondent character animation. This will give us the possibility to modify at any time the gun in a very easily and configurable way. For that, let's add first the new game object for the gun. Click on the Add New Object and name it Gun or whatever other name you want. Then click on the Add Animation to add our first animation to the sprite, name it Gun Idle, and click on the button Add to locate the new animations associated with the gun isolated from the player. In the folder where we have our art assets, look for the Idle folder, and then inside it, select the gun-specific set of images to import. When you have selected them, click OK to import them into the project folder. In the object property, be sure to select the loop checkbox for the animation, as it is an idle cycle. Let's preview the new animation of the new gun idle as to check on the result we have achieved. I think that it works great, since we are using different objects. To build the final game character that will be seen on the screen, we need to make sure that we will be always painting each of the elements at the same reference position. For this, it is very important to make sure that the origin point for the sprites is set to a consistent and equal position for all the animations in the group of objects. In this case, the gun and the player. For this, click the Edit Point button, and you can see that the origin point, represented by a red cross, is located in the left top corner. We don't want that, because it would create us some problems with the character position and the platforms. Let's change it to be at the center bottom position. Since Gdevelop don't have a reference system shortcut like Construct 3 or Unity have, we will have to do some simple maths to find the right coordinates for that point. In our case 165 for the X and 250 for the Y axis. You can see that the red cross moves to the new coordinates. Be sure to have the to slide button in blue and in enabled, which will tell Gdevelop that you want to apply the configuration to all animations. Be sure to correctly remember this step, as you will have to perform this operation for each new animation that we will be importing. By default, Gdevelop will turn off the option to replicate the origin point across animations, which will cause you to get some strange behaviors with the sprites when starting to code. Close the windows and let's move on, and then click on the Apply button to apply all the changes to the game object. We are now back to the scene view, and it is time to remove the gun from the character player by replacing the animations by new one with the player stripped from the gun. Double-click on the player object, and then let's be drastic and delete all the animations in the object properties for a new fresh start. Once finished, click on the Add Animation to add a new animation that we will be naming Player Idle, as to have some consistency to the naming that we have used for the gun. Click on the Add button and in the Explorer select the sprites for the idle animation without the gun. Click Open to import the animations into the project. Now, we need to repeat the steps that we made for the gun, and set the right origin point to the sprites, as to make sure they get painted at the same position and give the impression of effectively being one. Since the sprites for the player and the gun have exactly the same size, we can specify the same coordinates for the origin point. 165 in X and 250 in Y. Click the Close and then the Apply button on the player properties to apply the changes. We are back to the scene view, where we can see now our player without both the hand and the gun. Let's bring both back to the scene, by dragging the gun object from the Objects menu into the scene canvas. Don't worry you drop it, we will automatically adjust it while running the game. If we press play now to preview the scene, we can see that we have two objects for the player and the gun, both idling with the correct animations defined for them. At the bottom of the screen, we can see the green cube falling to the platform without affecting the character sprites. Let's change that and link them together. Go to the Events view and add a new event. Since we want these objects to be updated on all the frames computed by Gdevelop, we need to create a new event without any conditions. This will cause the corresponding action to be executed in all the frames. Click on the action and then select the player sprite. We want to change its position on each frame and make it the same as the physic player green cube position. So, in the search box right position and in the short list displayed by Gdevelop, choose the position of an object action. In the right pane options, click on the choose operator drop boxes and select the option set to, and then, in the X position and Y position, start to write the name of the object that you have set as to be the new platformer character, in our case physic player. You can see that the name of the object is now written in the text box trailed by a point. His is telling us that we are going now to specify a property. In our case, we want the X position. Repeat the process for the Y and, when finished, click on the OK button to return to the Event Manager. Copy the event that we just created for the player and paste it in the next line. Now click on the name of player and replace it by the gun object. We missed editing the origin of the physic player that we created, so let's go back to the scene view, double-click on the physic player object, and then on edit points. Drag the origin red across the bottom middle of the image and adjust the numbers manually to be more or less the bottom center of the image. Click OK and then apply to go back to the scene view, and then hit the preview button to check the results of what we have implemented up to now. The character has now the hand and the gun attached to its body, and both are attached to the physic player, represented by the green cube. Also, the character is not flipping anymore to face the direction of the movement. We might have made too many changes in the events. We will check on it. Now that the player character is bigger than it was initially, we also can see that some parts of the character are in front of the platforms while others behind. This is a simple problem with sorting order and the layers of the sprites that we will solve once we have implemented the main elements. Exit the preview mode, and let's go the Events tab. Let's find the events that deals with the movement to the right and to the left. We can see that we have changed the flip from the player character sprite to the physic player, which is wrong that it doesn't have to flip. Let's replace it by the player character sprite, and then since we are modifying this event, let's add the gun as we need to flip it in the same way than the character. For that we can copy the action that we implemented for the player, and paste it after this action, and then replace the player character with the gun. We need to do this action for both directions, left and right. Let's check the results. The player character and the gun are now flipping correctly when shifting the direction of the movement. Let's put some order on the events too. We are not yet going to create groups, because we have not yet a lot of complexity, but let's move the events to places where later on we will be able to group them easily. In this case, the condition to check if the player is falling can be moved to the bottom, and let's point the conditions from the player character to the physic character as to perform correctly the validations. Once done, it is time to start thinking about adding the new animations for the new movements that we have seen in the introduction to this video. For that, we will have to perform several checks on whatever the player is moving or not, and if sequences of keys are pressed or not. So let's add a new event by copying the event associated of physic player not moving, and removing the inversion of the condition as to check if the player controller is moving. Of course, the player can either be moving on the ground, or can be jumping or falling. This means that we also need to integrate that condition as to guarantee that we are able to perform the right action in the right states. So, let's add two new events, to check whatever the player is or isn't on the floor. For the conditions, we are going to use the is on the floor property that we will invert for the one where the player is not on the floor. Once created, Let's move the events that are associated with moving and not moving below the player is on the floor event, as to make them subevents. In Gdevelop, as well as in other visual game engines, using subevents can allow us to save some CPU processing, as all the conditions that are subevents will only be checked in case the top event to which they belong is met. We can transform events into subevents just like we did, by dragging an event below another one, or by indenting to the right the event. But we can also create subevents by selecting an event, and then clicking on the Create Subevent button on the top bar, where to the left you will see several buttons with the plus sign, and then it be used to create events, subevents, groups and manage layers. So, click on the subevent that checks if the physic player is moving, and then click on the button Add Subevent. Gdevelop will add a blank event below the one selected and slightly indented to the right. We will use this event to check if we are pressing the fire button, which in our case, we have decided that it will be the X key. You can select any key you want for your game. So add a new condition, and then check for key pressed, and in the key field enter the key that you have defined to be your fire button. Click OK to close and save the new condition. Let's copy this event for the fire button pressed and invert the condition. This will allow us to decide on what we should do in case the fire button is released. Remember that you can invert a condition by double-click on it and then clicking on the checkbox that inverts it, or by right-clicking on the condition and then from the pop-out menu, select the option Invert. Let's copy those two sub-events and paste them under the event that check if the player is not moving, as we will have to perform the same checks on whatever we are pressing the fire button or not. Since we are modifying the code that we had started in the last video, you can see that for the condition associated with the player not moving, we were already changing the animation of the player to idle. We can then move this action to the right place, associated with the player not moving and the fire key not being pressed. We can do it, as we did previously, by clicking on the action and dragging it to the action box associated with the fire button not being pressed. Let's change the animations for the player when he is moving and the fire button is and isn't pressed. First, add a new action for when the fire key is not pressed, choose the player object, and then set the animation by name to a new animation, that we will create afterwards, named Player Run No Fire. You may ask yourself on why are using names and not directly change it with the number of the animation, as it would be faster. But as you will see over the course of this video, the number of animations is going to be pretty big, and since we don't have yet totally them closed, it is best for the time being, to use the names, as it will make the process of using them easier. Later in the process, if we want, we will then be able to change them to be referred by numbers. Replicate the steps for the fire button pressed, and in this call the animation Player Run Fire. If we were to run the game now, we would see only the character animated. The gun is a separate entity, so we need also to change its animation as to be synced with the character. For that, create a new action, select the gun object, and then set the animation by name to be Gun Run Fire. Copy the action or create a new one under the sub-event that checks if the fire button is not pressed, and in this case, set the animation to Gun Run No Fire. So up to now, we are checking if the player is moving, and while moving if he is pressing or not the fire button. In each of the cases, depending on the result of the check, we will run a different set of animations where the sprites will be shooting or not. Of course, if you have a good memory, you are aware that we have been creating the events, but we have not yet added the animations associated with them. So if we were to run, we wouldn't be able to see anything. Let's head to the scene view and double-click on the player object, where we only have the new player idle. Add the new animations by clicking on the Add Animation button. Name it Player Run No Fire, and then add the sprites for the animation No Fire by clicking on the button Add. In the Explorer window that opens, go to the folder Run Fire and then choose all the sprites associated with the player. Click Open to bring them to Gdevelop. You have to remember that for each animation or set of animations that you import, you have to go the Edit Points option and make sure that the option Share Same Points for all animations is set, or you will see your character jumping all around for an unknown reason. Repeat the process for the player run fire animation and choose the new set of animations. We are done for now for the player. Click Apply to apply all the elements that we have added to the object, and let's do the same process for the gun object and the corresponding animations. I will fast forward this part as it is exactly the same process, but focused on the gun animations. Okay, time to check if it is running correctly. Let's preview the game. Well, we can see a first problem with the falling animation where we can see that there the capsule's bullets being fired out of the gun. We will solve that with pack of art later on. Once on the ground, the player and the gun are idling correctly, and if we start to move, we can see that both objects are also correctly animated, but after a while they both freeze. Seems to be a problem with the animation. Let's check it. Go back to the scene view and open the player properties. Okay, we forgot to set the loop condition and the animations were stopping once they reached the end of the animation. Perform the same action for the gun as to allow the animations to loop too, and let's try it again. Yes, the player is moving correctly to the right and to the left with the correct animations without firing. Let's try pressing the fire button. Yeah. The player is correctly firing to the left and to the right. If we stop moving, we can see that the player is not stopping, but this because we have not yet implemented the events associated with that state. Let's do it now. So go back to the Events tab, and search for the main event player is not moving, and specifically when not firing, and change the gun animation to the animation idle. Then let's go the firing option and let's create new actions to have the player play the animation player idle fire and the gun playing the animation gun idle fire. Once done, let's add those animations to their objects as to allow them to be played. So head back to the Scene tab, double-click on the player object and then add new animation, which is to be named Player Idle Fire, and select the sprites from the folder Idle Fire on the disk. Click the loop checkbox and fix the edit points. Repeat the step for the gun idle fire animation on the gun object. Let's preview. Yes, we can certainly shoot and idle to the right and to the left, and we can still move left and right while shooting. Although we have a small problem when going from movement to idle where the character is not changing the animation correctly. Let's fix it. Go back to the events and under the player is not moving and fire button not pressed, we can see that the names of the animations are wrong. They should be player idle and gun idle, so correct it. You can see here why it is important at the beginning to actually change the animations by name and not by their index. It would have been very difficult to debug and find the real reason why they were not being played correctly, and if we preview again, now everything is running as it should. Nothing like the smell of powder in the morning, and shooting a couple of rounds of bullets to make your morning. Time to check our design again as to make sure that we are implementing something that looks like Contra. In the game, we can shoot parallel to the ground to the left and to the right while moving or stopped. But if while moving we press the up key and fire at the same time, then we will shoot at a 45-degree angle in the direction of the movement and hit enemies that are in an upper position to the one where the player is. So let's implement this mechanic next. For that, we need to create a new subevent within the player moving event and fire button pressed. In that new subevent, add the condition to check if the key up is pressed. If it is, then the actions are basically the same that we have already implemented previously of playing the shooting animations for both the player and the gun, but at 45 degrees. So, we can copy the actions from the previous shooting, paste them in the sub-event, and then modify the animations by adding 45 to each name as to reflect that they are shooting at 45 degrees angle. Once done, we need to go back to scene view to add those animations to the player and gun objects. Since we have done those steps several times, we are going to fast forward on it, as to reduce the length of the video. Let's try it. What we had is still working, which is great, but if we try to shoot at the 45 degrees, we can see that although the animation is changing and the gun is pointing at 45 degrees upward, all animations are not played correctly. In Gdevelop, when this happens, it is usually because we are telling it to play two different animations in the same frame, and they both cancel each other. This happens because you have two conditions that are both valid for the different events. Let's go back to the events and check what we have done wrong. The problem is the relation between the main event and the sub-events actions. If you look closely to what we currently have, you can see that we are checking if the fire button is pressed, which if true, it will be executed. But then, under that event, we are checking that if the up button is pressed, then it should play another set of animations, which in our case it is also true. Which means that in the same frame, Gdevelop will launch those two animations which will end up having both cancelling each other. How can we fix this? Well, it is actually very easy. Let's create another sub-event for the case where the up button is not pressed and then move there the animations that we currently have on the action associated with the fire button being pressed. Run the game again. And as you can see can now shoot correctly at 45 degrees in both directions. Time for a new control check with the Contra system. So, we shoot horizontally, we shoot at 45 degrees, but we should also be able to shoot up and at a minus 45 degrees. Let's try to shoot vertically, which happen only when the player is not moving, as if you are pressing the up key and you are moving, then the player character will shoot at 45 degrees. For this, we need to repeat the steps that we have done for the up key while moving, but within the sub-events associated with not moving. If while not moving, we press the up button, then we will aim upwards, and if at the same time we press the fire button then we will shoot at 90 degrees angle. So let's go to the Events tab, and search for the sub-events associated with not moving. We are going to add a sub-event to the ones that we already had inserted associated with shooting or not shooting while stopped, and check if the up button is pressed. Insert a sub-event below the fire button being pressed, and check for the condition of up key being pressed. If it is, then what we need to do is change the animation to a new animation where the player will be pointing the gun upwards but not firing, with new animations that we will create later of player idle 90 and gun idle 90. Also, below the fire button being pressed, we will again check for the up button, and it is pressed. Then instead of shooting horizontally we will change the animation to be vertical at 90 degrees, both for the player and for the gun, with new animations player idle fire 90 and gun idle fire 90. Once we have created the events, we need to go back to the scene view and add the new animations to each of the objects player and gun. Since it a very mechanic process, let's speed up the video. Let's check on it is working. Okay, we can shoot in directions that were already implemented, but not at 90 degrees. Something seems to be failing. Let's review the events that we created. Okay, we have created the animations with different names than the ones that we had used in the events, so let's change them here in the events. Let's check again. Now, the animation starts to play but freezes. We have already seen this problem. It is caused by two different animations changes on the same frame. So let's jump back on the events and let's split the conditions used to avoid setting two different animations on the same frame. For that, we need to remove the change animations actions associated with the event fire button pressed. Create a new subevent where we test that the up key is not pressed and move the change of animations there and remove the action from the event. Run the game. This time, the animation is running correctly, but we are not able to differentiate between pressing the fire button and not pressing it. The game is playing the wrong animation. Go back to the Event tab and check the name of the animations. You can see that in our case we have named incorrectly the animations with the fire name. So, change the name to the idle at 90 and it should be okay. Double check it, and apparently everything is working. Before moving forward with the movements, let's allow for the player to shoot also while jumping. In Contra, when the player jumps he enters a roll and shoots horizontally in the direction of the movement. Currently we don't have a roll animation for this, but we will allow the player to fire horizontally in the direction of the movement while jumping. For that, let's go the section where we are checking if the physic player is not on the ground and let's add a subevent to check whatever he is jumping, and if it is, just change the animation to the new jump animations for the player and for the gun. In this case, since we are not yet testing if we are shooting, then let's run the jump no fire animation. To try a different way of checking for different conditions, let's use in this case a condition where we are going to check if the fire button is not being pressed while jumping or not jumping. So, add to the first condition a new one, where we check if the fire button is pressed, and then we invert it, as we want to process the case where the character is jumping but not firing. Copy the event, and paste it below, and now remove the invert option for the fire button being pressed and change the name of the animations to player jump fire and gun jump fire. In the video, initially we have set them without the object names, but we later on set it to the right names. Once set the events, let's add the animations for the player and the gun, which are going to speed up as we have already seen it several times. Let's check everything, and we can correctly shoot while jumping. There is still the problem of the jumping having some ammo flying over, but we will solve it in the final assets upload that will be companion to this video. Time to check again, what Contra have and what we have up to now. So we shoot horizontally. We shoot at 45 degrees. We shoot at 90 degrees, plus we can jump and fire. We are missing shooting downwards at -45 degrees plus the option to lay down on the ground when stopped and pressing the down button. Most of the steps to make this work are similar to the ones that we have done to have it shooting at the angle of 45 degrees with some slight differences. But now, when we are going to check if the up button is pressed as to see if can go to idle, we will have to check not only the up key, but the down key too, as we'll introduce it to check when to shoot downwards. So, let's go the event where we are checking if the player is moving and if the fire button is being pressed. Select the event where we check if the up key is pressed and copy it, paste it below, and then replace the up key by the down key. And then on the final animation to be played, we are going to use -45 instead of 45 degrees both for the player and for the gun. Then to check if we need to go to idle, we must check if the up or down key are pressed. For that we will need to use a new operator in Gdevelop, that is the OR. To add it, just go to the conditions section and then type OR in the search box, and then click on it. In our case, we have created a new subevent, added the OR condition and then moved the previous condition that we had checking for if the up key was not pressed into it. You can see that there is a small link to add new condition to the OR, so let's add a new one where we are going to check if the down button is not pressed. If the OR is met, then we should run the idle animations, so move to the actions of this new subevent, the actions that we had previously associated with the up key. Once done, we need to add the new animations for the downward shoot, so since it is the same process that we have seen several times, let's fast forward through the process. Let's check the result. Well, we can see that it is not running correctly as the animation is freezing. Let's go back to the events to see what we have done wrong. Okay, we have used the OR to check on whatever considering as to go back to the idle, but this is wrong, because, if only one of them is pressed, it will go to idle and there will conflict with the other animations. This means that we want met this condition and both buttons are not pressed. This means that we are not talking about an OR but about an AND. Click on the OR condition in the event, and in the search box type AND, you can see that Gdevelop shows you the option to select the AND operator. Click on it, and the OR in the condition has been replaced by the AND. Let's check again the game, and effectively, now we can shoot downward too at -45 degrees. Check the other directions, and you can see that you can shoot in all directions like in Contra. Okay. Before finishing the video, let's improve the visuals. First thing is to hide the green cube that shows our physics player. For that, go to the Events tab, and add a new event, and then a condition. In the search box, type begin, and you will see that Gdevelop will show you a condition called at the beginning of the scene. This is a special condition that is run once at the beginning of the scene load process, so add it. If you want, you can move the event to the top of the Events Manager, as to have it easily found in case you want to add more actions. Add an action to the physics player and then in search box type visibility, you can see that Gdevelop shows you actions that will allow you to hide the sprite. Choose the hide option and click OK to close. Now let's fix the platforms that were blending with the character, for that we can do it in two different ways. If we go to the scene view and click on any object, we can see in the object properties that they have an option that is Z order, which is a numerical value. The higher the value, the closer it will be to the screen and overlap all the objects with lower Z order. Our player has a Z order of 1, and our gun a value of 6, it is why the gun is on top of the player. We can see also, that right below the Z order option, we have another field that says layer, which defines which game elements are in the same plane, and within each plane, the Z order will define which object is higher in the layer or lower. So to solve our problem, we could decrease the Z score of the platforms and increase the ones of the player and gun, but the problem with this solution is that afterwards it would become difficult to adjust other objects in relation one to the others. So the best approach is to create different layers, by clicking on the fifth button from the left on the top bar that shows the name layers when hovering with mouse. Once clicked, you can see that it opens a new dialog on the bottom of the screen, where you can see the layers that already exists, in this case only one, base layer, and then a button that allows to create new layers. We will skip the add light layer for now. Let's create 3 layers, game foreground, game background and a game. We can create them in any order we want, as we can sort them at any time using the arrows that are in the right side of the layer. In the same place we can hide it or delete it. The higher in the stack the higher in visibility. Which means in our case, that game foreground will be above everything. Once the layers are created, we can go to each object and assign them to each of their layers. So player and gun belong to the game layer, the platforms to the game background, and we have not yet a use for the foreground but will certainly have as we progress through the game. Let's do a final check, and everything is working correctly. This has been a very long video. Sorry about that. But, there was a lot of controls to implement, and we thought that it was better do them in one shot. In the next video, we will actually start to shoot real bullets, based on the weapon properties, and we will implement the laid down shooting position for the player. We hope that you have liked this video. If it has been the case, consider subscribing, giving a like and clicking on the notification button. If you have any question, problem or comment, don't hesitate in putting a comment and we will answer as fast as we could. Not certainly as fast as Superman, but at a pretty decent speed. See you in the next video.